First, I just want to welcome everyone to our new series, From Earth with Love, Healing and Growing with Plants. This is the first of many more events to come. And as you saw in the slide, we have disabled the chat function for the purpose of this event today, but we do encourage our guests to use the Q&A function to ask Randhal questions that will then be moderated by myself and my dear colleague Naila Moore, who's joining us today. My name is Holly M. Crawford. I'm the Director of Education at ESMoA. And this new platform is centered on natural healing practices featuring herbalists from different parts of the country. I'm honored to welcome herbalist and earthworker Randhal Tabb as our first facilitator. We are living in a moment where many monumental issues are impacting our physical and emotional health. When we talk about health and healing in the US, health becomes a commodity. Healing, as we know, is a process, a holistic approach for the body and personal histories. Working with plants can reduce our stress levels, assist with recovery from illness, and improve our creativity. Working with plants is also about working through systems of resistance for our collective liberation. However, there is a practice of co-opting and appropriating these practices from Black, Indigenous, Latino, and Asian teachers and practitioners for a white audience. Ending the colonization of these practices is an essential part of the healing work and part of the bigger picture to unlearn colonizing behaviors that inform culture, our art institutions, our learning, and our health. And I'd like to share a quote from Randhal. "Choosing to be in relationship with Earth, taking time to understand the nature of my connection to it and other living things, shows me how to nurture my relationship to spirit, self, my community, and our collective power. For better or for worse, we are interconnected, and where imbalance is inevitably revealed, our healing requires holistic interpretation." And with these words in mind, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. We look forward to continuing with this series and encourage you to reach out to us at esmoa@artlab21.org. And of course, if you have any questions that are not addressed in today's program. And Naila, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Holly. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I would like to introduce to you all Randhal Tabb. She is a queer, non-binary nature and astrology lover, aspiring herbalist and earthworker, currently living, dreaming, and working with the soil on Piscataway land. The foundation of their practice is centered on healing and integration as a method of self and collective liberation and resistance, in particular through the lens of Black and Indigenous experiences in the diaspora. Their path incorporates holistic wellness, land, food justice, the exploration of ancestral, spiritual, and decolonized pathways towards healing and elevating community wellness and care through medicinal plant work and cultivation. We would like to begin with a discussion and ask you all, the audience, a few quick questions and just points to reflect on as we learn from Randhal. So our first question is, what does healing look like to you, to your community, and how are you actively engaging in healing in your life? And our second question is, if you are using herbalism as a way to navigate your healing, what does it look like right now? And just some points to consider when we talk about health and healing in the US, health becomes a commodity, when healing is actually a process, a holistic approach for the body and personal histories. These plants are here to accompany you and help you on your journey. Mutual respect, consent, and active participation are required to work as a herbalist. I would like to now turn it over to Randhal and begin our program.
Thank you, Naila. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us here today and taking time out to have this discussion and learn about tinctures and healing. To get started, I guess to talk a little bit more about myself beyond my introduction, my path towards this practice really has unfolded kind of like a quilt, I would say. There's been a lot of threads that have converged into the space where I am now in terms of my relationship to plants, plant medicine, and healing itself. the earliest roots of my practice were really just having an affinity for nature and plant life, since childhood. Granted, I had really bad allergies growing up, and I had limited green space, but I also had a garden that I loved to be in that really affirmed my love for growing things and learning about plants. I also was privileged enough to have access to agricultural spaces, and I really fell in love with green open spaces and just seeing things grow. And I started to collect tree bark and flowers and stones, which now adult me translates into collecting leaves and roots and crystals. So those were kind of like my early foundations of my practice. And as well as being a foodie, I claim that, being a foodie and eventually becoming interested in the foods that I was eating, what they were doing and how they were working in my body, and how I could use them to feel better if I was, feeling any kind of discomfort, or just adding layers to my knowledge of what I was actually consuming. So a lot of the herbs and spices that are common that I didn't even know were medicinal, like ginger and turmeric and clove. Later on I learned that they do really great things in the body, not only for your physical body, but also your emotional body, and for psychological aspects as well. So the next expansion of my practice really was my self-healing journey, exploring different healing modalities like aromatherapy. I learned that there are certain essential oils that helped with inflammation that I was using topically for my skin, and then also scented oils that I'd make for comforting purposes, for calming myself and healing through anxiety. And I discovered a text called The Path of Practice by Maya Tawari. And that was kind of like one of the fundamental pieces along my journey, learning about food being medicine, envisioning healing as something that's holistic, so that involves not just the body, but also the unity of the body, the mind, and the spirit, understanding that I'm not body parts, I am a whole being. And so my healing is also about wholeness, and my healing should address my entire body, not just one organ inside of me. And Maya Tawari was also the first person of color that I really recognized in this discussion of plants and plant medicine, which is interesting considering, as a Black non-binary person with diverse heritage, including, Afro-Indigenous heritage, folks indigenous to the Americas, to Africa, to South Asia. I had never seen someone that looked like me represented in this field of study. So that kind of took me to a space where I was investigating more about my ancestors and how they heal themselves, how they use food as kind of their ally, and just opened up a lot of interesting questions as far as how I wanted to pursue my own healing. And the last iteration, the most recent, I won't say the last because I'm constantly evolving and constantly growing in this journey, but the most recent iteration of this is participating in a mentorship for beginner farmers. And I learned a lot about Black land liberation, Black and Indigenous land liberation, about Black food sovereignty, and food apartheid, which I have to credit activist and farmer Karen Washington for coining that term. It really provides better language around the concept of food deserts, which, if folks are not familiar with that concept, is just the idea of Black, brown, and Indigenous folks not having access, really being robbed of access to nutritional foods, to healthy supporting foods. Just having realizations around that allowed me to connect to the fact that in terms of healing, we experience the same thing. We've really been, in a lot of ways, robbed of awareness and knowledge around our own medicinal practices, our own forms of medicines that our ancestors used, that are really the basis of herbalism that we see today, a lot of the foundations as far as working with plants and having an understanding of, you know, experiences with plants came from our ancestors, but we don't find ourselves often represented. So I'm coming to the space now as a person who's, you know, read so much, absorbed so much information, but now also has had the very important experience of working directly with plants and developing my own relationship with plants, which is just integral to actually using plant medicine. And I don't even like using the term using plant medicine. It's really about working with plants and tuning your body to the healing that your body needs, to the balance that you need through plants and their healing powers. So yeah, I'm in the space of decolonizing my practice still. And I'm really appreciating having this space to talk more about what that looks like, and then also how I apply it in my life. And Naila, I'll let you continue on the next leg, I guess, of the discussion.
Thank you. So I kind of want to ask some quick questions about how you got started with your herbal practice. Yeah, and if you could just share that.
Yeah. So kind of, well, what I just explained is kind of how I got started. Like I said, just having an affinity for nature and doing my own journey of self-healing. And when I first started, folks like Rosemary Gladster, who is, I guess some people consider her to be, I mean, when you talk about herbalism in colonized spaces, she's very well known. And she's a great resource if you don't know about different plant properties or you're very new to herbalism and plant medicine. But again, as far as I know, there's been no recognition of how, you know, the work of my ancestors and the experience of my ancestors really makes her work possible. And so it's been important for me to find spaces where I'm working with other Black herbalists or other Black earth workers so that we can reconnect to our ancestral knowledge, we can reconnect to our ancestral practices and kind of reclaim that narrative and reclaim, you know, healing that really speaks to our experience. Healing through oppression is a huge thing because that's not something that everyone identifies with, but it's major for us. So finding plants that support the nervous system has been really huge for me, you know, dealing with anxiety, dealing with stress. Yeah, that's where I'm at in my process now, is just getting deeper connected to the earth, getting deeper connected to my own spiritual practice, and deeper connected to the narrative and experience of my ancestors as well.
Thank you for that. And can you also give us some more insight about like what the healing benefits of holy basil are?
Absolutely. So holy basil is also known as Tulsi in India, where it has origins. And it's really, my favorite property is that it is an adaptogen, which means it's great for the nervous system, for calming the nervous system, helping you relax. It's also really good for your entire immune system. So it's supportive if you're, you know, just feeling kind of fatigued or run down. Holy basil kind of like lifts you up. It's also good for if you're experiencing symptoms of a cold or congestion. It does have properties to kind of support your mucous membranes so that you're becoming more, like you can basically not deal with as much mucus and congestion in the body. So I really love it as a tea and as a tincture, which is what we'll be talking about today. As a tea, I mean, you can make it into a chai or just have it, you know, on its own. But as a tincture, you'll get more of those properties more directly into your bloodstream, so you'll notice the effects a lot faster.
So speaking of tinctures, can you kind of give us more insight into what it is exactly?
Absolutely. So a tincture is essentially an extract of either some kind of plant material, so it can be the flower, the leaf, the bark, the berry, or the root of a plant. And that's mixed with a high proof spirit, typically mixed with a high proof spirit to extract the compounds and the active ingredients of the plant into the alcohol. So basically the alcohol is like a solvent. And as I explained previously with doing a holy basil tincture, because, you know, the solvent is alcohol, it reacts a lot faster in the body. So whereas you may need maybe like 4 to 5 cups of tea to feel the effects of holy basil, you can take like a dropper full of tincture and feel that same effect. So it works kind of more quickly. It can be an easier application as well. And tinctures are more shelf stable, so they last 5 to 6 years at least if it's made properly. So that's really good that you can take your time with the medicine. Some other preparations like water infusions will only last like a few weeks to a few months. So it's just maybe a more reliable source for some folks who want to work consistently with an imbalance and don't want to be timed to a specific time frame in order to do that.
On the topic of tinctures, when you're looking at how to make one, you said, or we know that we can use holy basil, also known as tulsi. Are there any other plants that we can use for a tincture?
Absolutely. So any plant, pretty much any medicinal plant that you can think of. So plants that have properties that address insomnia, you know, headaches, stress, digestive issues, cold and flu, reproductive issues, they all can be made into a tincture, pretty much. There are some plants that you would only want to use, for example, maybe just the leaves and not necessarily the flowers, because the leaves will have more medicinal, more concentrated medicine than any other part of the plant would have. An example of that would be the elder plant, which has been very popular during these pandemic times. So you have elder flowers, elderberry, and then the elder leaves. So the flower and the berry of the elder plant are the only edible parts of the plant. The leaves are actually mildly toxic and wouldn't interact well with the body. So you can use elder flowers to make tinctures if you want to focus on more of like the flavor. It's still antiviral. It's still great for, you know, if you need to reduce a fever or you need to address a cold. But the berries probably have the most concentrated of the medicinal properties that you're looking for, and it's kind of the most common is to make a tincture using the berries. But there's many examples of things that may be growing like in your backyard, even things that you may think of like mint, lavender, oregano, other types of basil, thyme. You can make tinctures into all of these different plants.
That's great. And so would you recommend like growing your own garden and having those plants with you, or is there a place you could like pick them up? Like, are there stores that provide these types of herbs and plants?
I recommend if you can grow your own plants, that's great, because it helps you, like I said, develop that relationship with the plant, get to know the plant better, and you're just watching the plant grow, you're nurturing it, hopefully you're speaking with it, and I think that just adds to the experience. But if you don't have a garden space, or you know, you don't have great lighting in your apartment, like I don't have great lighting in my apartment, so I can't grow most plants in mine. You can check out, you know, your local herb shop. I say please support local as much as possible. Here in my area, I use Blue Nile herb shop to get my herbs. You can also try Mountain Rose Herbs, which is an online source. Please don't use Amazon. That is my personal ask. Don't use Amazon for anything, especially herbs. There's usually, you know, a small, you know, store that has herbs, and sometimes it just requires like maybe a Google search or connecting with, you know, herbalists in your area. And then there's also the concept of foraging, which is basically wild harvesting. And the important thing about that is proper identification. So you do need to do research to make sure that you've identified, like if you want to wild harvest yarrow grows everywhere, or a dandelion grows everywhere. You can use these for tinctures. make sure that you're using the actual herb and not a lookalike, because yarrow has plants that look similar, but they're not yarrow. And you can, again, Google can help you identify, other herbalists can help you identify, to make sure that you're picking the right plant. But to be extra safe, you can always go to an herb shop or grow your own plant. And holy basil can be grown indoors. It does prefer a lot of light, and so definitely give it, full sun if you're available, or direct sun if you're able to do that.
So I also had like a quick question. Like, let's say I would like to start my own garden. Are there any like plants you would recommend that are easy to grow at home, or that are easy for beginners?
Mm-hmm. So like I was saying, a lot of herbs or plants that you weren't sure were medicinal are already growing possibly in your garden, like peppermint, lavender, nettle. Nettle technically is a weed, but a lot of folks have nettle growing in their yard, and that's really great for allergies and sinus issues. I mentioned before oregano, thyme, evening primrose. These are all kind of like fairly easy plants to grow and take care of, that can be made into a tincture. And also things like chamomile are really great too, not necessarily for growing, but it's pretty easy to source chamomile, and it's very safe especially if you're doing like some of your first tinctures and you want to do something that you are relatively familiar with and won't necessarily have any sensitivity to. Chamomile would be a recommendation that I can give for that.
Do you have any recommendations on any like plants or herbs that specifically help with like mental healing? And can you kind of speak more to like the mental healing process?
I'll say in terms of mental healing, it's more like the plant medicine we use to kind of attune our body to balance. So, because we have this idea of healing and health in this culture that, you just kind of like pop a pill and you're good, suddenly you're cured, or, and so when you're dealing with plants, it's more about allowing yourself to go through the process of your entire body is acclimating to this plant. And so if you're using holy basil, for example, and you have a relatively severe anxiety disorder, you may need to take extra steps to actually get to a place where you feel balanced, but the plant is going to support you along that journey. So passion flower, holy basil, St. John's wort, let me think about another one, lemon balm are some of my favorite plants to use for, again, calming the mind, calming mental chatter, lowering anxiety, lowering stress. You actually can feel it in your body. And I think that's an important thing to say too, is that as you're using and investigating different herbs, it's a good idea to pay more attention to your body in general. See how you feel. Like, are you getting more or less sleep? Are you more or less agitated? How's your digestive system feeling when you're taking these tinctures? Because it will speak to you. Like, your body will tell you like what's working and what's not, and whether you need to adjust the plant medicine you've chosen, whether in dosage or in frequency or not. So it's a very intuitive process. And the ones that I've mentioned, like I said, are really great. I really, really, really love the healing properties of those, as far as, again, calming the mind and nervous system. But then also there are things like oat straw and marshmallow root and dandelion root that are cleansing to like the liver and the kidneys, which we may not think is connected to the nervous system, but our gut is very much connected to what's happening in our brain. And so if you are having a lot of digestive issues that you may be unaware of or aware of, it could be linked to fatigue, anxiety, and depression. And so you want to maybe do both. You're taking passion flower and lemon balm or holy basil to bring more immediate calm to the mind, but then you're also using herbs to help settle your digestive system and seeing how that works for you, seeing if by addressing the needs of your digestive system, you're actually healing the mind as well and bringing overall balance to your body in that way. So combining basically different plants to achieve a holistic form of wellness.
I think it's a really influential perspective to look at like healing and wellness as a holistic approach rather just than separating everything like mind, body, and spirit, like understanding how everything is like connected and how different aspects of our body all work together for our better well-being. So yeah, it's been really interesting for me personally because it's my first time learning about tinctures. So yeah, I really appreciate that perspective. And on the topic of just like healing, are there any different ways you can apply these plants? Like, can you make them into like a paste, like oils, like that are beneficial for like sensitive skin and things like that? Or are there any recommendations you could give?
I mean, there's so many different plants you can use for tinctures that you can also use to make into a tea, to infuse into oils. So you can use like a kind of a carrier oil, like sweet almond oil, avocado oil, apricot oil is another one, or jojoba oil. And also like using things like lavender and chamomile for supporting the skin. And lemon balm also is another one for supporting the skin. So you'll find that a lot of plants have dual or more than dual properties. You know, it could be great topically and also, you know, taken in your tea or your soup or what have you. But then you also need to be aware that there are certain plants that shouldn't be ingested, that should only be used topically or only be used or won't have as much benefit, you know, topically. And that just takes some research to identify that difference. I'm thinking now of ones that I didn't mention before that can be used in oils or tinctures. So sage, cilantro, red clover. Red clover is another weed. You see there's like the little purple flower ones. Those are really great as a tincture as well and help with hormonal balance. Rosemary, ginger, turmeric, I mean, all of these things, again, you can infuse them in oil as well as in tinctures. So they're really great to start as a basis. Again, they're things that you probably already have in your kitchen, may already be growing in your garden, and you can experiment with them and see, you know, how your body reacts and how you like them.
And so as we're like learning about tinctures and learning about herbalism as a whole, are there any like people you learned from that you would recommend, or any like books that you would recommend for people who are interested in learning more about the subject?
On the subject of learning more about how our ancestors approached healing with plant medicine and how that's really informed modern day herbalism, I can recommend African American Folk Healing by Stephanie Mitchum. She doesn't go so much into the actual recipes themselves, but she talks a lot about the experiences of what healing looked like on, this is particularly for, you know, for black folks and indigenous folks as well, what healing practices looked like on the plantation, what healing practices were brought over from African spirituality that are, you know, still present today in the ways that we use, in the ways that we view healing and in the ways that we apply plant medicine. So it's good as just having like a good framework for the role that our ancestors have played that we don't really, you know, get acknowledgement for necessarily. I also have the Yoga of Herbs. This is a good follow-up to the Path of Practice, which again for me was an introduction to Ayurvedic medicine and learning about the energetics of different plants. So there's a whole system around plants that may be healing or cooling, that are bitter versus sweet, and how that interacts with emotions in the body and energies in the body. So if that's something that you're interested, Yoga of Herbs is a good resource for looking at different herbs and what their energetics are, what systems they address in the body, and what preparations that you can use for them. And then I also, on a spiritual piece, Jambalaya is by Louis Tesh is one of my favorites. Just gives a lot of, again, more on the mystical side, different rituals that you can include for different herbs. That's really spoken to me in my connection with, you know, how I want to apply like plant medicine to my life personally. Working Cures by Charlotte, that is another one. Again, a really deep analysis on what herbalism looked like on, you know, in the South, you know, rising out of experiences on the plantations, and then also how basically our ancestors wouldn't necessarily call themselves herbalists. They would have called themselves, or been in community with folks who were designated healers that call themselves conjurers or root workers. And so it really explores the experience of spirituality mixed in with practical applications of plant medicine and the importance of that. And then last but not least, I feel like I'm going through like a list. This has like been a Bible for me. I don't even know if y'all can see this. Working the Roots by Michelle Lee. Over 400 years of traditional African American healing. So this really goes through, first of all, it gives like firsthand accounts of folks who have used this medicine their entire lives. It talks about different oils and remedies and teas and tinctures as well. Caring for yourself, caring for your animals. And I mean, these are recipes that again have been around for a really, really long time, and talk about the traditional herbs that were used by, you know, folks who developed these practices. So of all the books, this one is my absolute favorite if you're, you know, especially for Black folks and other people of color that are looking for resources from, you know, people that identify with their experience.
Can you give us like a demonstration on how to make a tincture with holy basil?
So for starters, for folks that don't know what holy basil looks like, this is some holy basil that I picked earlier in the week. And this is kind of like when you'd actually want to harvest from the plant. So it's not flowering yet, but you'll see that it wants to flower. And maybe there's like 1 or 2 flowers on there. This is the perfect time because the medicine right now is really concentrated in the leaves. So brilliant green color. It smells like a mix between clove and basil to me. It's kind of like a sweeter basil as far as like a taste profile. I really love it. So what I like to do before I harvest is I do a practice of consent and respect for the plant. And so I, you know, say a prayer of gratitude for the plant. I thank the plant for, you know, its existence and the healing properties that it is extending. And some folks also, you know, like they leave like gifts for the plant or something like that. I just like acknowledging gratitude for the plant, and that's important, an important step for me. And another thing I'll say is that if you are wild harvesting, to just practice sustainable harvesting. Like, don't take everything off a bush just because it's there. Only take what you need. Practice gratitude. And also there's a website called unitedplantsavers.org. Use that as a reference point for what plants are considered endangered, because there have been plants that have been so over harvested that at this point there's just very few that are left, and they're considered endangered. Just like we have endangered animals, we have endangered plants, unfortunately. So I wanted to mention that too. So I have in a bowl in front of me some tulsi that I've already harvested, And I like to use a mortar and pestle. You don't have to use this step, but I like to use a mortar and pestle to kind of get the juices going and to help the leaves dissolve better once they're added into the alcohol. So just gonna crush them in the mortar, and you don't have to like crush them to smithereens or anything like that, but just enough that, you know, you're gonna see some juices release maybe, or you'll smell it, and that's how you know that it's really working. So take your time doing this. And sometimes when I do this, I like to envision, you know, the intention for the medicine. So like I said, holy basil is great for relaxing the mind, relaxing the body, and bringing, just supporting the immune system. So I imagine if I'm using this medicine for myself, how I want to feel as I'm taking the medicine. If I'm making it for other people, I imagine, you know, I'm just sending that energy to them, and I'm visualizing, you know, them feeling good, them feeling calm, comforted or supported through this medicine. I think it's important to infuse some of your own power into the medicine that you're making. So once you have it nice and crushed up, you're going to take a mason jar. This is a pint. There's also quart sizes. I'd say for your first tincture, just stick to something small like a pint or half a pint, and see how you feel about it before making like a big batch and then, you know, kind of having mixed feelings. And so you're going to put, oh, so this is an important thing. Some folks practice what they call folk tincture, which is essentially eyeballing. So, you know, some people would say, I'm just going to fill this up to about an inch from the top with herb, and then fill the rest with alcohol, and that's it. Other folks actually measure out. So if you want to have a more accurate measure of how much medicine you're really making, you can use a scale, and you can measure out the amount. So the ratio is like a 1:5 ratio for dried herb and flowers, and a 1:2 ratio for fresh herbs and flowers. So that means if you had 4 ounces, if you weighed, you know, 4 ounces of dried herb, then you'd use 20 ounces of alcohol, 20 ounces or like 2.5 cups of alcohol. If you used the other ratio for fresh or fresh plants or leaves or flowers, it would be 4 ounces of the herb, and then 8 ounces or a cup of the alcohol. So it's up to you whether you feel like doing the math. Some people feel better about that and some people don't. I usually say that if it's fresh herb, I use 2/3 to, you know, 3/4 cup of this being full. If it's dried herb, then I'll do about half full. If I'm using roots or berries or bark, I'll do anywhere between 1/3 and 1/2 full. The difference being that fresh herbs tend to have a little bit more moisture in them already, so you're going to use a little bit more just to make sure that it's really being dissolved, and you want to get it as concentrated as possible. So I am now putting the Tulsi in my mason jar. And if that is too fast and anyone has questions, feel free to let me know. I know I kind of sped through that a little bit. As far as preference, I don't really have a preference for fresh versus dry herb. There are some plants that you should always use dry. And again, that just requires, you know, just a little bit of research to find out which ones they are. And if you are using fresh, I suggest making the tincture that day, like the same day that you harvest, because a lot of plants don't really keep that well. Once they've been harvested, they start to kind of break down. And so you just want to make it, you know, as fresh as possible. So I actually only have enough for half And that's fine. I combined, you know, what I have. Sometimes you just gotta work with what you got, and it's still okay. So in terms of alcohol or your spirits, 80 to 90 proof is usually recommended. So 80 proof is about 40% alcohol, 90 proof is about 50% alcohol. You typically want to use, you can use vodka, you can use rum, you can use brandy. The benefits of using vodka is that it's neutral, so it doesn't impact the flavor of the herb at all. Holy basil tastes actually really good, so I think it's fine to use vodka if you want to use that. I prefer using brandy and rum just because I think vodka sometimes can be a little bit too strong for my taste. I like a little sugar in my medicine. So it still works, you know, it's fine if you want to stick to those. I will say if you're using a tincture made out of roots, bark, or berries, it's better to use a stronger alcoholic content to make sure that you're really absorbing as much medicine that you would want to. So you can either combine a 1-to-1 ratio. So let's say if you're using a cup, half a cup of rum or vodka, and then half a cup of grain alcohol. So something like Everclear or something that has 190 proof alcohol. You'd mix those two to get a higher concentration of alcohol. Or you can use just straight up 95% alcohol, which is just using Everclear or grain alcohol. It is very intense. It can dehydrate your herbs as well, so just be careful if you're going to use the highest concentration, just making sure that you're using a very sturdy herb, not a very like just be careful with that. It's not dangerous, it's just that the taste is going to be impacted for sure, and you want to make sure that you can handle that in medicine. So for today, I am using brandy, and I am going to go ahead and fill this up. Now, another thing I wanted to say is that if you just feel like being super folk and you just be like, look, I want to use all of the herb that I have and it's almost to the top, just make sure you use, make sure you leave at least an inch of space so that the alcohol is totally covering the plant matter. You don't want any of the plant material to be exposed because that can promote mold, and you don't want mold in your medicine. So just make sure you're leaving plenty of space for between the medicine and the alcohol. So I just poured in, sorry you couldn't see that, but I just poured it into the top. You can see some parts are like floating, but for the most part there's plenty of space for the herbs to move around in, and they will settle down a little bit too, so they won't be exposed. So the next thing you want to do is, if you're using a metal lid like this, to make sure that you don't have any like weird interactions happening with the metal, you use some parchment paper, and you would just put it on the top like this, and then screw the top on and tightly. Put a little bit too much parchment if you can't really see the. Okay, there we go. So yeah, this is tincture making. Fairly simple. You're gonna go ahead, shake it up. You're gonna shake this, and when I say shake, just like lightly do this every few days, and let it sit for 4 to 8 weeks is the spectrum. I think 6 weeks is fine. I usually use 6 weeks. Some people only want to wait for 6 weeks is my measurement. Leave it in a cool space, out of the sunlight, so maybe in a cupboard, away from your appliances, because appliances can give off heat. So in a cool, dark place. And you also want to make sure that you are labeling what is in the tincture and the date that you made it. So I would put, July 30th, holy basil. if I was using a ratio and I wanted to kind of experiment with ratios, I could say 1 to 5, or I'm sorry, 1 to 2, you know, fresh herb ratio, so that I remember that. Maybe next time I try it with dry holy basil and use a 1 to 5 ratio just to see if I like that better. It's a lot about just experimenting and finding what feels best for you, but of course doing it in a safe way. And it's really safe to experiment with alcohol because it will keep it, you know, the alcohol is going to preserve it. And as long as the leaves stay covered, you're not going to have to worry about molds or anything like that. It'll stay nice for you. At the end of, you know, the 6 weeks, you use either a strainer and gosh, I'm blanking on what this is called right now, but you know what this is. So you'd use this to strain any of the plant material into a dropper bottle. You can also use a coffee filter or a cheesecloth or muslin to strain. You just want the liquid. You don't want any like leaves or leftover, you know, bark or whatever in there. It should just be pure liquid. I prefer to use amber ones because again, it keeps the sun from interacting with any of the medicine. And I recycle these all the time. Like I've purchased some, I've purchased some mushroom tincture, which is another option. You can use mushrooms, dried ones, to make tinctures. So when I'm finished with this, I'll recycle it and I'll use it to make my own tincture. And I'll mention that if you don't want to use alcohol for any reason, so let's say you want to give medicine to a child, or you personally don't, you know, really rock with alcohol, you can use food grade glycerin, food grade vegetable glycerin, and that's it's the same process as with the alcohol, except instead of alcohol, you'll use 3 parts glycerin to 1 part water. Distilled water is preferred. You know, use pure water as much as possible. The glycerin tinctures will probably only going to last like 1 to 2 years at the most. And for the vinegar, if you want to use vinegar, you would want to use raw apple cider vinegar only, not white vinegar. And you really only want to use this with like dry herbs and berries. You don't want to use fresh herbs with this because it's not going to preserve in the same way. So, and it would probably only last about a year. So the benefits of alcohol: lasts longer, really great preservative, but of course, if you can't use alcohol for any reason, then you do have other options and you'll still get, you know, beautiful medicine from those other options as well. So yeah, that is tincture making.
Great, thank you for that demonstration and giving us so much insight onto making tinctures. I also had a quick question for the tinctures that include apple cider vinegar. I know the taste is a little strong sometimes. Would you recommend adding any type of like sweetener or something to help with the flavor possibly?
Mm-hmm. You can add honey, because honey also has like antibacterial and antimicrobial properties. So you can add like, if you want to split it, you can do like a half a cup of honey added into about like 3/4 cups of vinegar, for example. Yeah, and that will help with the flavoring. I have made elderberry tincture with apple cider vinegar, and because elderberry, it's not necessarily sweet, but it does have a fruity taste, so it wasn't gross. It actually tasted really good. So that's one that I can say you don't necessarily need to add a sweetener to it, but yeah, you can add some honey, and there's different recipes as well that adjust for like, certain plants. Maybe you use a little bit less of the honey, but yeah, definitely, like I said, stick to dry herbs, dry plants, berries only with raw cider vinegar.
And then just on the topic of making or finding recipes, do you have any like go-to places that you go for your recipes, or is that something that you found like along the way?
I don't necessarily have go-to places. What I like to do is, again, be more intuitive with it. So if I understand, for example, I really like the taste of lavender. I really like the taste of chamomile. And I really like nettle as well. Not necessarily the taste of nettle, but nettle is like kind of more of a neutral taste. So I would combine those because I know that it's kind of sweet. It's going to help me relax. It's going to help me with insomnia. And so I turn that into a tincture. Or, I like to experiment with different flavors and then also understanding of what their properties are. So I don't have any go-to like a website or anything like that, but you can, like I said, use the internet as a reference. You can, as long as you pay them, ask your herbalist friends for suggestions. But I really encourage folks to really understand that you are your own healer. So there's a level of agency that you can take when you decide that, like, I want to investigate for myself what these herbs do. I want to experiment with what they taste like. And it's all about that process. Like, along the way, you might find that, like, oh, this herb didn't work out for me. Like, I didn't really like that experience with that plant. But it adds to your arsenal, and you can keep a journal and talk about, what your interactions were with certain plants and how they worked or did not work with your body, how they worked or did not work with your healing, approach them different ways. And it's a really rewarding experience to do it that way. Of course, making sure that you are aware of any possible interactions that these herbs may have with, any other medication you may take, because there are, like St. John's wort, for example, really great for depression, really great for anxiety, but it can interact with other medications that you may be on. So you just have to be careful with those. And I can share, if folks are still looking for resources, I can share some things that I've used in the past to help guide me. But it's mostly been an intuitive experience and having conversations, like I said, with other folks who are interested in plant medicine. So that's been my path so far.
Randhal, thank you so much for joining us today, for kicking off this new series centering health, wellness, our relationship to the earth, to one another. We're so thankful for your time, for your wisdom, and for experimenting with this new platform with us. Shout out to our audience too for bearing with as we learn we adapt to the new technologies. I know we're just past the hour at 5:02. I know we started a little bit later, but Randhal, is there, healing is a lifelong process, we know. But I was wondering, before we all leave here today, what is another takeaway that you would like us to take with us in our healing journey?
I think the biggest takeaway is just realizing that we're all interconnected. We're all having our individual experiences with our healing, but our healing impacts our community, our healing impacts our family. And so when you take on this journey of finding what healing modalities work best for you, finding what plants work best with you, it's really, I feel honored, to do that work, but it is work, you know what I mean? And it is a commitment, and I think it should be taken seriously. I think that it's really important to honor and respect the traditions that we benefit from, or we may be in danger of, again, appropriating or stealing, or just taking up space that we don't necessarily have authority or really a right to take. So for other Black folks, for people of color that are coming into this work, I would say, welcome into this practice. This is a practice that absolutely, your ancestors have been doing for millennia, and it feels really good to do that work. You'll see the rewards of that. in yourself and in your relationships. And for other folks, you know, everyone is welcome for healing. Like, healing is necessary for everyone. So I would say everyone should be mindful of how we're utilizing this power and how we're not necessarily weaponizing or restricting access to healing, depending on like where we are, you know, what our history is, what we have access to. So yeah, I'm glad that we're just having a conversation about healing, period. I think it's going to be really continue to be important on all levels to address healing holistically, address wellness holistically, and we're truly in this together. So I appreciate folks who really taking it on, and someone is always here, you know, to support you, even if it's just, you know, a little voice inside that's like encouraging you to like keep going. Like there is absolutely a room for all of us to do this work, and it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I also just wanted to acknowledge that today's workshop we are broadcasting from the homeland territories of the Tongva and Piscataway peoples, respectively, and we do extend our immense gratitude to the original stewards of these lands and also to the many Indigenous people who are living and working in these lands today. And bit of good news that a big part of land up in Northern California has just been, I don't like the word return because that was never actually ceded, but that it will be under the care and original stewardship of the original inhabitants of that land. So the healing work is ongoing and begins. Oh, Randall, before we leave, is there, in the spirit of, what's the word? In the spirit of support, in the spirit of health, are there any organizations that you would like to give a shout out to where folks can learn more, they can involve themselves, or if they have means, can contribute?
Yes, so I really love the ones that we highlighted, some of everything that is active in LA. I had never heard of this organization before, the work they're doing, and I love seeing its impact in LA and Watts. Also, I don't know, Holly, can you remind me of the name of the organization?
Noisy Library.
Yes, Noisy Library. Sorry, thank you. So, but I actually learned about both of these organizations just the other day, and I was really inspired by the work they're doing to lend resources to Black, trans, and non-binary and queer folk in particular. That's definitely a demographic that has been super hit by, you know, the pandemic and always faces issues of job loss and not having as much access. So I'm happy that both of those organizations are receiving support today. Definitely support them with your funds. In terms of mutual aid, look in your socials because there's always someone that's posting something for sure, especially if they're, you know, involved in earthwork. They're posting how you can contribute locally. I really encourage folks to do that. And beyond some of the major organizations, I mean, I appreciate the work that, you know, Black Lives Matter is doing, for example, but there are smaller organizations. There are folks who are, you know, organizing their own things out of their homes, for example. So definitely be on the lookout for those. And I will continue to share any networks I continue to come across on my socials as well.
Naila, thank you so much for moderating our discussion this evening. And if anyone would like a book list, we'll work with Randall to get a bibliography to you. We'll send that out. And we just want to thank everyone so much for coming. I don't see any questions appearing in our chat box at this time, but of course, if we didn't cover anything, or if you were like me and you remember 5 minutes after the workshop has ended, I had this question I would love to ask, we can direct you to Randall, yeah, you can connect with us at ESMoA at artlab21.org.